Welcome to part 2 of implementing an S1000D project, what you need to know. So last month, Rita and I got together and had an hour-long discussion about things that you needed to know for your project. If you didn't get to see last month's session, please connect with Samantha. She will give you the first session so that you can go through that, and then the second half, of course, today will make more sense. For some of you who weren't in last month's session, a little bit of a background on OneStrand. So OneStrand Inc. is an industry-leading technical consulting services and software solutions provider. With the combination of a shared vision and world-class experts, OneStrand continues to provide our customers and our partners with the most comprehensive set of solutions available for creating and managing the life cycle of technical documentation and data. We provide solutions for every facet of the technical documentation lifecycle, from authoring to archiving for air, land, sea and space programs. We have over 25 years experience in technical documentation management as well, combined with decades of experience developing software. We offer the most cost-effective, user-friendly S1000D solutions in the marketplace, and we have worked closely with agencies to ensure stringent requirements for defence and aerospace are met. We also brought to market the first modular S1000D hosted solution, which is our OneStrand Air platform. And we partner with our customers by creating an atmosphere of learning and encouraging accountability. We earn our place each day with our customers, and we value the long-term relationships that we have with them. Just a very brief slide as well on the core components of the R4I S1000D product suite. These are not all the components, but the most common ones that most of the customers use on a day-to-day basis. And that's the R4I CSDB, or Common Source Database, which is used to manage and publish critical content to IETP or IETM, depending on what terminology you want to use. R4I Writer, which is our powerful XML authoring tool. It's optimised for the S1000D data formats. It comes in both a personal edition that you can use standalone, or of course you can use the professional or standard edition attached to the Common Source Database. R4I Viewer is our royalty-free online and offline IETM or IETB viewer, and you can distribute that royalty-free from our CSDB. R4I Binder is our powerful drag and drop tool for creating manuals and handbooks and large technical books, not necessarily just from S1000D content. We have a lot of customers that store in our CSDB and publish to legacy ATA, MIL standard, SGML, XML, any of those SGML and XML formats can be stored and published to IETP and also via Binder to PDF. R4I IPD, or Illustrated Parts Data Manager, is our tool that automatically generates hundreds of data modules, IPD data modules specifically, in a few minutes from engineering parts spreadsheets or databases. And of course, there's the link for the hosted Air platform. So OneStrand Air, I mentioned earlier, is our hosted platform. If you prefer to not purchase software and install it in-house, you can have it hosted in the cloud. And that's shop.onestrand.com. And various different components and packages are available up there for you to have a look at. Our presenter today is Miss Rita Nye. Good morning, Rita.
Morning, Tammy.
For those of you who may not have met Rita is a senior consultant who had been at Absolute Data and now OneStrand for 11 years. Rita has 14 years experience in IT, with the last 11 specialising in SGML and XML publishing systems, analysis and development, including, of course, dynamic database publishing projects, delivery to web and complex print requirements. Rita is, of course, a trainer, which is why we get her so involved in our educational webinar sessions. And she specialises in S1000D and the R4I S1000D product suite. Apart from having a lot of experience with our XML authoring tool, R4I Writer, Rita has also worked with legacy tools such as Arbortext Editor and Adobe FrameMaker version 7 through to 2017. Rita is also well known for her style sheet development in both XSLT for IETP or HTML delivery and XSLFO for those wonderful complex print publishing project requirements. So Rita, today we're going to kick off with just highlighting what we covered last month, right? And then we'll jump into what we need to know to finish off those highlights of what you really need to know.
Okay. So as Tammy said, in last month's webinar, we started the discussion of what do we need to know for implementing S1000D. And in last month's session, we covered what is S1000D very, very lightly.
Yeah.
We just gave a little bit of an understanding and what you needed to start to consider from an S1000D point of view. We then started looking at what are your project requirements, and we got about halfway through that. So we're going to finish going through that aspect of it. Then we'll jump into the final delivery requirements or options. So with that, if we look at what do we need, so last month we looked at business rules and breaks, style sheets, and the DMRL or the data module data module requirements list.
Oh, we've got a typo there.
Just noticed
so that would be DMRL.
Okay, so this week or this month what we want to focus on is CIRs, applicability, and internal review cycle, and we're also going to touch on external review cycle as well when we get into our final delivery options.
Yeah.
So it's just to give you some understanding. So if we look at this, CIRs. CIR stands for Common Information Repository, and these are data modules that act like little mini databases for all sorts of common information. And as you can see there, we've listed some of the samples, which are tools, consumables, spares, warnings, and cautions.
They're sort of the more obvious and common use ones, aren't they?
But it's not just limited to those. Okay, so if we think of it from an author's point of view, from an authoring perspective, we have a whole range of data that's common across many different data modules of content. And if we look at the S1000D methodology, it's write it once, use it many. So what we're trying to do here is look at it from the point of view of what common information can we reuse across all of these different data modules. So with that, what we want to be able to do then is utilise these CIRs. Now, inside your business rules, you do need to document quite clearly if you're going to use CIRs, and if you are using CIRs, you do need to work out which variants of the CIRs you're going to use. Now, a little bit of good news, bad news. If you're working with the specification 2.3 or below, I'm sorry, but CIRs aren't available in those. The first time CIRs were introduced into the S1000D specification was in version 3, and at that point in time it was called a TIR, or a Technical Information Repository. So it was very much geared towards just that technical information, and then in version 4.1 they changed the name of it from a TIR to a CIR, and they've continued to expand on that functionality since the implementation of the TIRs.
I kind of like the CIR name actually, because it is common information, isn't it? And that's the point. It's the sort of information that is repeatable, it's shared, and it is common for your program. So it kind of makes sense.
Correct. So if we look at it from the point of view of tools, consumables, and spares, if we think of the version 2.3 and below, you had to manually type into your document all of the details about the tool or the spare or the consumable.
Yep.
What was its name, its part number, how much do you need?
Chance to get it wrong, isn't it, every time you do it?
Correct. And you've got to repeat that information across all of your data modules. So that one particular, let's pick on a tool, that one tool may be put into thousands of data modules because you're constantly using that tool all the time.
Yep.
So let's say we've got a project, let's say we've got 7,000 data modules, and out of those 7,000, let's say 2,000 of them use that tool.
Yep.
So in 2.3 and below, if that tool description or details about that tool, part number, anything
got replaced,
changed,
yep,
you've got to edit all 2,000 data modules.
Yeah.
Which is a massive amount of work.
For something so small, really.
Something so small.
Yeah.
Lots of time, which of course means money.
Yep.
So we jump into version 3 and above. We're using CIRs or TIRs, whichever one, and we've got our tool CIR. Now, in those 2,000 data modules, instead of putting in all the details about the tool, we simply reference to the CIR.
Yeah.
So now those 2,000 data modules all just have a reference, which means that you jump into the CIR and you make the relevant changes inside the CIR once, and all 2,000 data modules have now been updated when you generate your deliverable. So it has a massive time saving and cost saving. So from a management perspective, that's dollars.
And of course there's that that shift in opportunity to have error, right? Like I said, if you're manually typing something, when you do it again and again, and especially things like part numbers, you get numbers mixed up, right? It's really easy to make a mistake. So you're just improving that quality effort again.
Absolutely. So we want to be able to make sure that we can have a really good understanding of what are these CIRs and is the project going to utilise them. So we need to document it inside our business rules. Again.
Yep.
So if we were looking at version 4.1 or version 4.2, the CIRs that we have available are functional item numbers, circuit breakers, parts, zones, access panels and doors, organisation, supplies, list of products and list of requirements, support equipment, applicability, warnings and cautions. So we do have quite an extensive list of CIR capability.
So notice notes, of course, are not, but I guess they're not.
I wish they were, though.
In some regards, I guess, you know, safety warnings, cautions is kind of an obvious one because you literally have to structure those, word them a certain way, and you do reuse them again and again, where notes are probably a little vaguer. They're not necessarily something as common.
Yeah, but I still look at it from the point of view, you reuse the same note multiple times.
Probably not as much and not as much of a concern, you know, at the risk, you know, if you've got warning text wrong, etc. But yeah, it would probably still, it's kind of like they went there, so why not give you the option, right?
Absolutely. It would have been nice. Hey, we'll sit back and see what happens with the new version when it eventually comes out.
Yeah.
It'll be nice to see if it does. So we need to know, are we using them? And of course, if we are going to use them, then we also need to look at it from a style sheets perspective.
Notice that,
Yeah, because we need to understand how does that CIR information get presented into the deliverable. So if we think...
Because it is dynamic, isn't it? Because you're like extracting, as you're publishing, you're extracting the content, aren't you?
Yeah, it really depends on the S1000D solution that you're using. Some of them it may just simply reference off to the particular CIR.
Yeah.
And then the viewer or the publishing mechanism needs to be able to pull that information in. Others, it might be that it physically gets injected into the content.
Copies it, yeah.
It's really up to the solution as to what they do.
But certainly it's a piece of text that appears suddenly, doesn't it? And you've got to format it, so it does have to be taken into account.
It has to be taken into account. You've also got to look at it, if we think of our parts information. If you go to 2.3 and below, that parts information, it's pretty limited with information that you can put in. You've really got the name of the part, a short name for it. You've then got the part information, which can either be the manufacturer and part number, or it could be the NSN, and such. So there's
only like 6 or so things, isn't there? Yeah.
And then you've got your quantity and you've got your remarks. That's about it. If you jump into the CIR, it has a lot more information.
Oh, so you can detail a lot more. And I guess you may not actually present that, though, in the document, right?
Correct. But you can have information such as what is the primary part number, what's the alternative, what's the supplier's part number. There's a lot more information that can go into the CIR.
Which is kind of like a holding repository for all that info.
Correct.
But you may not need that in the publication. So what you actually render, hence the style sheets, is up to you or what's required.
Correct. And you then need to look at it from the point of view of, okay, we've got all this information. What does the customer need to see?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a difference, isn't there? And because one's like a holding repository of information for you, like you said, everything about who the supplier is, you know, alternate part details, all of that, but that's not necessarily what the end user needs in their PDF or their viewer. That's right.
They may. So you need to have some way of being able to render that information. So you really do need to dig quite heavily into the CIRs and have a really detailed conversation with your customer to work out what information do they need
displayed. What do they need?
And then go through and work it all out. So it's very much that conversation process, hence why it needs to be really considered quite early in the project as to whether or not you're going to use it. Because if you make a decision of, no, we're not going to use CIRs, and then at a later date you go,
oh, that's a lot of reverse engineering, isn't it?
We're going to implement. You've got to reverse engineer.
Yeah, you've got everything you've hand typed has now got to come back out.
Correct. So you've really got to understand what's the ramifications of using or not using a CIR. So we do need to understand that and make sure that we make a concerted effort on what are we doing and how are we going to use it.
Yeah, and I guess it's like, and I mean, this is why we're discussing these topics, right? The topics we chose last month to discuss and the ones we've chosen this month are because these are the common pitfalls or the common scenarios and things that you need to consider when you're starting an S1000D project that are going to potentially save you a lot of time or a lot of money or a lot of reversal and they're going to get you a lot of benefits to why you're using S1000D and XML in the first place. So we've focused on all the things that particularly, you know, managers don't realise are very important that you take the time to plan, discuss internally, discuss with your customer.
Absolutely.
And document in those business rules. I mean, we nag about it constantly that, you know, there's a reason why you go to all the trouble of writing business rules. They're your guidelines for you, your customer. Not necessarily that they won't change, but you need to sit down and plan this stuff out. And the list of topics that we chose for this two-part series is because this is the stuff that's going to save you money long term.
Correct.
Yeah, and of course get you better results overall.
Which is what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Additionally, we also need to be aware of where can we get that CIR content. So if you've got an LSAR system,
classic place,
you can get the content out of the LSAR system, which means you're already pre-populating those CIRs with a lot of information. So you don't even need to necessarily
write them from scratch.
You know, someone has actually sat inside the LSAR system. Hopefully not physically, but hey, but they've sat in front of a console and they've gone into the LSAR system and they keyed that content in. Well, we've already spent the time and money for that person.
Engineers have done that, that's right.
So if we can get that content out.
Anything we can reuse, right?
And we can then reuse. The authors or the lead authors then need to look at that CIR content and see if they need to expand on it a bit more.
Absolutely.
But if we can get the content, that's our starting point. So again, it's looking at all of the tools that you have available on hand,
information,
and where we can retrieve that information. So the more that we can do that, the better it's going to be. Because the authors can then understand it. The authors also need to be aware which CIRs are we using. So it's no good telling the authors, we're using CIRs without telling them which ones.
That's right. I mean, that was a pretty big list, you know, zones, access panels, doors. So, I mean, you know, some of the more obvious ones, which is the ones you've listed there, are probably going to tick off the top list, right?
Absolutely.
But there may be others.
But there could be others.
Depending on your project, your asset. Yeah.
You know, circuit breakers could be a really big one that they need to consider. So, again, it's looking at what we're using, what we're doing, and identifying what we need to have inside that particular environment. So we need to make sure our managers are really aware of what can be done and then look at implementation of that information. Because, of course, the biggest thing we're looking at is reuse. S1000D says, write it once, use it many.
Yep.
So we want to be able to follow that process in the system. Okay, if we now jump across to consider applicability. Now, with this, the project needs to make a decision on whether or not they need to consider applicability. Applicability is, in ATA it was effectivity, and it's really, are we managing multiple variations of content in the one deliverable? Okay, so during this whole analysis time, we need to make sure that we've clearly identified what are we doing, what is the end deliverable to your project. So with this, we need to be able to identify, are we going to put in applicability? And really with this, we've got three choices. It's option one, there's no applicability. So that means that there's no variations of content inside that documentation. So we don't have model A, model B, model C. There's none of that. We have one asset and there's no variations to it. So that's option number one. Option number two is that we can utilise the data module code to identify that we're using variants. So with that, we can then start to look at it. We can use the system difference codes to identify a different variant. If necessary, we can use the disassembly code variant, or we can use the information code variant. Those three can help to identify our different variations of information. The negative to doing a data module code identification is that the information contained inside the data module may be an immediate or a complete duplication with some minor changes. So you're now putting in you're duplicating the content. So again, we can have that information. So that's option number two. Option number three is we define our applicability, and this can be either 3A, let's be very technical with this, a whole data module is a specific variant, or 3B, if we continue the scenario, one data module contains all the variants. So it sounds really complex, but if you look at it from a long-term perspective and ease of duplication or removal of duplication, inside one data module we can have all the common content and then the information that's relevant to variant A, variant B and variant C, or models A, B and C.
So one of the examples I love to see is I guess the classic example is when we consider, for S1000D customers, a lot of them have the equipment has a very long life cycle.
Absolutely.
And so if we were to say, let's say we've got a truck and at the start of its life we may not have any applicability, right? We've just got a particular model of a truck. And then we might find a system, and let's use a simple system, something like a radio, might get replaced. Now, in the scenario where we're now in the truck, we've got this radio system, is completely different between this year and this year, or the next year, you would probably have a completely different data module, wouldn't you? If they're quite substantially different, you'd probably, that's the B choice, was it?
Yes.
Where you're actually physically writing a separate data module or a set of data modules for that new system.
Yeah.
And so when you're delivering information, it'll be the truck with this system and system A, and then the truck with system B, basically.
Yep.
Now, if, however, the radio was just a minor update or upgrade, and it might be, you know, additional warnings in a console or an extra button or something like that, we probably wouldn't do a whole set of new system documents for it.
Right.
That's then the scenario, like you were saying, where you'd have all the common information and all the original Model A radio pieces, and then the few extra features or maybe steps, because the extra button you've got to press in the Model B would be inline, right, in that one document.
Correct.
So that's a good example of, you know, why you might be writing completely separate set of modules with applicability, or just putting the text inside the document, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So if from an author's point of view, and it sounds really bad to say it this way, but from an author's point of view, once that applicability has been developed, for them, all they've got to do is assign an ID.
It's the model, isn't it? It's the creating of the applic model initially.
It is.
And sort of the planning.
Yes. The authors need to understand how the applicability is being developed.
Yes.
So that they know which ID to put against which piece of content.
Yeah.
But for them, it's a simple process of going into whatever element it is and assigning an ID.
And there's still a little bit of reading between the lines too, isn't there? Because if you've got, like you said, a few variants, you know, A, B, C, D, as you're writing each paragraph, you've got to be on the ball, like if you're...
Absolutely.
Okay, have I assigned the right ID to the right content?
Not only that, but as you're updating content, say it's a procedural step, you can't use, you know, most of our authoring tools, if you're looking at it from a WYSIWYG or a preview function, it automatically populates the step numbers. If there's applicability in there, you can't rely on those step numbers because you've got a mixture of common and specific information for each of the different variants. So the author needs to be able to look at that content and understand where does it all fit together.
Yeah.
And they can't just look at it and go, oh, that's the wrong step, delete it.
Yeah.
And then put in their fresh content, because they may be deleting some content that actually relates to one of the other variants.
Yeah, yeah.
So they need to think through and understand what is.
Because that numbering will normalise or clean up when you filter applicability on the fly, right, ready in the PDF or in the IATP.
Correct.
So they can't expect to see the numbering perfect with those, you know, A, B and C steps removed because I only want the D step, but all the auto numbering will fall into place when you filter with a good system.
With a good system.
Yeah.
But, so from an author's point of view, they've got to spend that time identifying what it is that has been, how has that applicability been developed? Now that applicability, it's not going to be one person that makes the decision. It can't be. When you're looking at a whole system or a whole asset, look at a truck, a plane, a ship, a building, there's lots of different configurations and lots of information that you need to look at. So there is no way that one single person is going to sit down and develop that applicability.
Yeah.
It's going to be a team effort. So you really want to be able to sit down and, you know, my usual suggestion is, okay, you sit in a lovely big boardroom, you've got the lovely big boardroom table, you fill it, cover it totally with paper, and you can start writing down and saying, okay, these are the different systems that we have, and that then gives us that ability. Now, if we jump across and say, do we have an LSAR system?
It might also give you some of that information.
If the engineers will have already thought about this and broken it down into the system, subsystems,
Potentially.
subsystems.
Yeah.
So if you've got an LSAR system, you're already going to have a pretty good idea.
Well, and it's why we always say you have to involve the LSAR team and engineers, and, you know, when you start planning your S1000D project.
Correct.
Because, again, you want that reuse, you want that well documented, that well, you know, that strategy for your S1000D program to just be implemented well to get all the benefits. And you need all that wealth of experience in the room, and it's why they should sit down. And, well, like we said in the business rules component last month, they need to sit down with that spreadsheet and go, okay, who are we going to need to make the decisions on how we're going to do this?
Correct.
And different people will be needed to help make decisions.
Absolutely. So once you've made the decisions, then it's the implementation of that applicability.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you know, lead authors would more be involved with developing the applicable
Model. Yep.
in the content.
Yep.
And then from a general author's perspective,
Educating them.
Yep. So that the authors know, okay, if I'm updating, you know, that relates to information for variant B, then my ID that I've got to use is this. And you need to be able to read that applicability section and identify the differences.
Yeah.
So that we can go through. Again, if at the initial start of the project it was decided that we're not doing applicability, but at a later stage, because as you said, these are long-term projects.
Yeah.
These are projects that could go from 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
So again, what we want to be able to do is be able to identify, can we update and modify to implement applicability?
Yeah. Yeah.
So at the start of a project, it might be, yep, we're not doing applic.
Don't need it.
But 10 years down the track,
you might have to add it.
Actually, yeah, we do need to add it. So we need to consider that and go through that process. If we don't, then we then start looking at it from the point of view of duplication. So we do need to consider those different options.
And I guess it's one of those things that, you know, there's a fair chance they might go, okay, we know there's literally only one model at this point in time, but we know for a fact that we will be doing potentially 4 throughout the life. So we'll start planning and start writing in that fashion.
Yeah. So we need to look at it from that point of view.
Yep.
Additionally, and this is just with my thought process going through, you may have deliverables for different languages.
Absolutely. Languages is another applic setup.
Correct.
Yeah.
So again, you need to work out how we're going to do
we have that sort of concern? Yeah.
If you've got to have content delivered into multiple languages, how are we going to do that? Because if you think of it, in the identification and status section of the data module, we specify the language and the country code.
Yeah.
So country code, okay, may be a variant, but the language code, you'd normally look at it and say, okay, for us, we do English.
Yep.
But if we're now delivering to a customer that's in France, do we need to deliver that content in French or English?
Are they staying in English? Yeah.
So if we're doing it in French and English, we need to consider, are we putting all of that content into a single data module and we're going to pre-filter?
Again, with applicability?
Or are we going to duplicate
and use the language code?
And then use the language code. So again, we need to be able to identify how we're going to implement that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when you first start working on your asset or writing about your asset, your customer may be English only.
Yeah.
Great. And then salespeople come in.
Sell it to another country.
And they sell it to another country. And that country goes, oh, we really want to have the content in our language.
Local language, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That changes the landscape.
How's it going to be changed?
And of course, the other, you know, sort of spanner in the works in that scenario, like you said, that's kind of a simplified version of, okay, we write English, and then, we know we now have to duplicate to another language. So you'd probably make a copy of all the data modules, put the French language on it, and have a translation company potentially translate. However, when we've got scenarios like in Canada where they automatically, you know, there's going to be the Canadian English and the French Canadian, so and they have to be side by side in the one publication, that potentially changes your whole landscape and your planning, and it is it's an upfront, you know how you're going to have to be working, right? And so that definitely changes your thought pattern on how you're going to be doing languages.
Absolutely. So again, we need to be aware of how is this going to work.
Yeah.
So we need to sit down and really have...
As much as we know ahead of time, yeah, better results. And not all things are ahead of time, right? But yeah, wherever possible. Yeah.
Correct. So again, we need to think of it as much as possible. And yeah, at the initial project, it could be a simple thing of, yeah, look, there's no applic, great, we document that into our business rules. But 10 years down the track, anything can change. So as we know, these business rules, they're living documents. They're not a write it and they're set in concrete. These will change as the project changes.
Yeah, it's an evolution.
Yeah. So we do need to have that consideration. So when we're looking at applic, we do need to think forward, but at the initial start, it could be a simple thing of, we know this is the only variant and we're not going to be doing
expecting any changes.
So therefore you can work with that.
Yep.
And it's only at the time that you do definitively know, hey, we've got some variations now, that's when you really do need to be able to sit down, work out the applicability, and make sure that you're looking at all possible variations of options, and then educating the authors so that the authors understand how to apply it in that environment.
In that fashion, yeah.
Okay, so again, it's making sure management understand the benefits and then going from there. Okay, review cycle. Now, I decided to break this out into two because I thought we'll do an internal review cycle, but then we'll also look at an external review cycle as well. So the internal review cycle is very much how within the project team are we going to have our communication process. So in most instances, a verbal instruction is not what we want to run with because, you know, if you've ever played those wonderful games of Chinese whispers, each time that verbal information is passed on, it gets changed. So we want to have some sort of written communication that allows us to communicate between our team members to make sure that everybody clearly understands exactly what we're doing. Okay. With that, if I'm an author and I'm writing my documentation, do I communicate directly with QA to tell them that this content now needs to be reviewed, or does it go to the team lead and the team lead does the communication? You know, if you've got a team of 15 authors and illustrators and then you've got another team of 5 QA, do you want those 15 people communicating directly with the 5 QA? Most probably not.
No.
So you want to have a very clearly defined communication method. That could be email, it could be
a workflow
process, but you've got to look at the tools that you have and work out what's the best way to utilise that. So we do need to have that documented quite clearly, and also if you've got third-party suppliers or contractors, again, go back to that scenario of the 15 people, are we going to allow all 15 of them to communicate directly with the third party or contractors? And again, it would be a no, because you don't want contradicting pieces of information being sent through that mechanism. So we do need to look at our internal QA processes and internal communication processes to make sure everybody clearly understands what is that communication flow. So if we think of it from a QA point of view, if we think of the traditional publication method, so with that, you know, you've got your team of authors, the content's all been broken down into chapters or sections, and you've got authors that are working on specific chapters and sections. Okay, and at some point in time, all of those chapters and sections will all get bundled up into a publication. Doesn't matter if it's an IETP or a PDF for this, but it's a publication. And at that stage, that publication gets issued to QA. The authors jump onto another project.
Yep.
QA might take 3-4 months to QA that publication.
I guess at best, probably chapters, don't they? They might have subject matter experts looking at different chapters, but still it's a big chunk of content.
It's a big chunk of content.
Yeah.
And so the QA process occurs, and at some point in time, that content comes back to the authors for them to update based on the QA.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it may have taken 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
That author's been working on a whole different project for the last 3 months.
Or a different chapter, or which is a different system, and
it could be anything.
Yeah.
And so suddenly they've got this content, and they've literally got to switch their brain back to
what they did a few months ago.
What they did, and they've got to look at the information, and they've got to be able to review it.
Yeah.
And then based on, or not review it, but based on the review, they've got to update it to reflect the corrections. So it means that the author has to jump around a fair bit.
Yeah.
If we then jump across to an S1000D environment, remembering we're writing data modules now, which are small snippets of information that are fully self-contained.
In the ATA world, it's classed as what, a task. Yeah.
Correct. So with that, as a data module has been written, it can be issued to QA. So QA can then review
Look at that task,
and send the information back. The author who wrote that may still be working on that system, and it's still fresh in their mind. They've still got all of that information.
Fast turnaround, isn't it? And I mean, it's one of the comments that I think most people, as they move to S1000D, particularly that internal review cycle, they say it's just incredibly fast how, you can just keep things cycling around.
Correct.
And complete, what would be the equivalent of a chapter in the past very, very quickly.
Absolutely. So we can do that. Now we also need to look at it from the point of view of how are we going to do that review. So from an author's point of view, let's pick on the poor author, they're going to author the content, they're going to PDF that, and the PDF gets issued to QA.
Potentially, yeah.
It's an option. If that's the method that you're going to use, we need to document it so that people understand how we're going to do our QA.
Yeah, what tools are we using to PDF?
The tools,
and then,
the whole lot. Can your authoring environment generate a PDF that's going to display all of the information? Or does it need to go through some other mechanism to be able to do that? Remembering that if we think back to our style sheet topic, inside our style sheets we need to make sure that we've mapped all of the styles for the elements that we're going to use. And so authors need to be aware of the structure. So we need to have a clearly defined review process. So we can use a PDF. It's a little bit more of a nightmare to be able to manage the storage of those PDFs and be able to track them through. The other alternative you've got is there is actually the comment module that S1000D has, and it's very much designed for that engineering review process. So with that, the QA can literally use that comment module function to submit the QA back.
So that's another potential. So, and of course the comments are tracked as part of the internal common source database.
So again, we want to make sure that we're thinking of all of the different processes that we're going to use to manage that. So again, we want to do that process. So we want that all documented into our business rules. So that's the sort of things that we need to consider
for internal.
Then, of course, we come to our final deliverable. Now, with our final deliverable, there's really 3 choices available: PDF, IETP or IETM, and data. And you could be delivering all 3. So we need to know what is our deliverable that we need. And once we've been able to identify that deliverable, we need to make sure that everything that we're doing is geared to that deliverable. So if we're producing PDF, we then need to look at, and illustrations are the perfect example for that one, what type of illustrations are we going to use to put into the PDF.
To get a high quality PDF.
Correct. So if we're only doing PDF, you could look at TIFFs or EPSs because they're really good high-res graphics. Or you could go for an SVG. You don't necessarily need to go for a CGM though.
No, and in fact, a lot of rendering engines don't like CGMs.
So we do need to take that into consideration. We also need to be aware that inside a PDF, if you're putting hotspots into an SVG, they're not going to function. So we do need to take into account all of that capability. So we need to identify our deliverable requirements.
And of course, that, I mean, it almost becomes a question then, doesn't it? If you weren't delivering an IETP and you are delivering a PDF, why would you bother with adding hotspotting? So again, back to the, you know, at the very beginning, what are our delivery types? Because some of the things we're going to do in our content, our images, is going to vary. So, okay.
Remembering at the very beginning of the project, you will have sat down with your customer and identified how do you want this content to be presented. Okay, so most customers tend to be fairly, yeah, look, we can take it as S1000D inside an IETP or an IETM.
Yeah, they don't mind the S1000D design look that's in the spec for an IETP.
There may be specific sections of it that they don't want to see, which is fine. Again, your style sheet development would take that into account. If we're doing PDF, oh, can we make it look like S1000D?
Never. So
and
rare.
you can just about say every customer is going to go, no.
We want it to look like how we've always had our PDF publications.
Yes, so it's going to be some sort of mil spec or proprietary specification.
ATA
look. There's a whole range of different things. So we go through that whole process of developing a style sheet for that particular output. Taking into account all of the schemas that we're working for, all of the elements within those schemas and how we're going to present that content. So if you're writing procedural information, are we displaying preliminary and closing requirements? We're populating them, but
do we need them?
Do we need them?
Yeah, for the end user.
You know, if we're using CIRs, we want to populate the preliminary requirements and then reference to them inside the procedure. But that's just for us for benefit. But the end customer may never want to see those preliminary requirements. So we need to understand that. So again, identifying what is our deliverable allows us to go backwards to what do we need to do. So understanding that, we need to do it.
And of course the topic of images, which is, you know, what you were saying earlier on, if we're doing PDF, TIFF and EPS are great. If we're doing an IETP, CGMs are good. If we've got both, we're probably going to contemplate, well, either we need something to convert CGMs to for the PDF to keep a high quality res for the PDF, or you move to something like SVG because it works really well online in IETPs and it still holds quality for PDFs as well.
So so we've got a lot of choices with that. So we've generated our deliverable. Doesn't matter what it is, but we physically generated our deliverable. We issue it to the customer.
Now, feedback.
Okay. Is it simply hand it to the customer, dust our hands and go, there you go?
Not likely.
So there has to be some sort of method documented as to how the customer is going to provide feedback. First of all, how are they going to accept or reject that deliverable?
Well, I mean, a data delivery, they need a way of validating your data is actually correct. Correct both to schemas, breaks, like all sorts of things. So, if you could imagine, okay, it's never going to happen, but you're the manufacturer of the content and your customer is right next door. Do you literally produce a PDF, put it onto a stick and walk around and hand it to the doorman and go, there you go? No. So again, you need to have it documented who is the primary contact of the customer. Official delivery.
Or it may not be a person, it may be a position that you're doing a deliverable to, because that person who sits in that position they may move quite a bit. The personnel may move around. So you want to have either the person or the position that you're delivering to.
I know one of our customers as well, when they have to deliver an IETP, when they deliver that IETP, because the customer doesn't want a data delivery, they have to prove that all the data modules are in the IETP and that all the links work.
Correct.
So they have to actually have a tool that is able to do the link validation, prove all the objects are actually in the IETP that need to be, and they have to provide that report with their IETP to the end customer. So again, what do they expect?
What do they expect? So this is that whole conversation with the customer right at the beginning of the project of what is our deliverable and what are we expecting with that. So that it all starts with
functionality, styling,
absolutely
everything. Yeah,
it all comes back to what does the customer want.
Yeah,
and then once we have done a review cycle with the customer and they've provided feedback, we then update and go through, which of course is how often do we need to deliver the content?
Yeah, monthly, quarterly, yearly,
weekly.
Yeah, and they do expect much tighter cycles these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, going through and being able to get an update once a week. If you can get that through that review cycle, both internal and customer external review, that quickly, then yes, you can do a weekly update. And you need to have the tools that allow you to be able to produce that quickly. So it's looking at what is all of that customer requirements. What do we need to physically be able to give to them so that they can get their content? So it's looking at that. So really, when you start a project, you actually start with what does the customer want and work backwards.
And sometimes it's even, I'm not going to say sometimes, most of the time, it's even educating the end customer as well.
Correct.
You know, because of, you know, S1000D capability, and because you've asked for an IETP or an IETM and you don't necessarily know what that means, but it's just something that the project office has been told they should ask for, it's part of that education process, isn't it? On, okay, well, you've asked for an IETM. What functionality do you want? How do you want it to look?
Yep.
You know, are you wanting data as well? You know, just because you're getting an IETP, people kind of think, oh, well, I've got the data there, right? Which is not necessarily true. You know, there's a lot of proprietary IETPs that it's proprietary back-end information. You can't extract,
correct,
you know, XML or SGML from the back of that.
And most viewers do that.
Yeah,
they do need to have some proprietary information.
Yeah.
So yes, it's very much that conversation with the customer. Yes, you won the contract, great. Now it's educate the customer with what is really S1000D and then understand what is their expectations.
Yeah.
So we've got to go through that.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we think of everything that we've been talking about
the last 2 months,
for the last 2 months or the last 2 webinars, the first thing it does is it highlights the importance of business rules. We do need to have things documented quite clearly and defined exactly what we're doing, right down to, from an author's point of view, what's the structures that they're going to work with, which schemas, and based on those schemas, what is the structure that we're going to have. We do need to have all of that clearly documented so that we're not doing Chinese whispers and we're not relying on all of the authors to make their own notes.
Yeah, their own decisions, yeah.
Because if we rely on the authors writing that information,
we're not going to get the end result.
They're not going to be a cohesive group. So we do need to make sure that we have very clearly defined business rules.
Yeah.
And we then also need to look at all of our project management considerations. So what does the customer expect? That's our final. So we need to look at it from that point of view. What are we delivering? How often are we delivering it? What's the QA process, internal, external? What's the depth of content that we need to produce? All of that needs to be incorporated into the implementation process so that we don't get partway through writing the content for our first deliverable and suddenly realise, oh, we've missed X, Y, and Z. So we do need to go through that process.
And you know, I mean, a lot of this stuff is common sense, isn't it? It's what we always say is project management 101. It's, you know, for delivering to a customer, it's technical writing 101. But it's just formalising it with, you know, these business rules. And like we said, it's just something you have to do. It will save you time and money later if you sit down at the start. And it's also something that management needs to take into account.
Absolutely.
Is that there is that, you know, I'm sure they're always used to a start-up or ramp-up time of setting guidelines and processes and procedures, you know, for any project. There's just a few extras with S1000D.
Yes.
But the benefit of taking the time to do that is you will get the benefits of S1000D and an XML delivery.
Absolutely.
By taking the time out to do that.
Yeah. So you've got to just go through that process. It sounds crazy, and most organisations, you've already got a fair chunk of that information already.
If you've been delivering to mill standard and ATA, there's so many similarities, it's not funny.
Yeah. So you've already got the practices in place.
Yeah.
It's now just formalising
it officially for S1000D.
Correct.
To ensure you get the benefits of going to S1000D.
Yeah. So it's just looking at it and just tweaking the way that you currently work, just so that you've got everything documented.
Yep, all your ducks in a row.
Absolutely. So from that point, it's any questions that people may have.
Okay, so if there's any questions, if you want to maximise your little button bar with the orange arrow and type any questions in there now, and while we're waiting, Rita, to see if any questions are typed, we'll discuss next month's webinar. So on the 19th of March next month, we will be doing RFI binder service. So we've done a couple of theory topics for the last 2 months. So month of March we'll be doing a product webinar session, which will be on our binder server. So we've recently released RFI binder version 9 professional and standard. The binder server edition is about to come out, and so the additional capability of what occurs, like what features do you have in a server edition. So that's already up on our website, ready for people to sign up for that if they want to see that. And yes, if you have any other questions as well as we exit today, or if you're already having to walk out of the room, we've put our details, our email addresses up there for you to send any questions to. And let's just have a look. I think we've got a question. Different stages. So like IPR, verification, identifying the type of deliverable. Through the S1000D process, they don't actually have, do they have that listed as a stage? Can you do stages for deliverables? So is it at validation, verification stage, or is it at earlier stages?
The only thing you've got inside an individual data module is to be able to do a QA status, which is either the content's unverified, it's at first or second verification.
Okay, so that's, I think, what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So a first verification. Okay, so first of all, from a QA point of view, if you're doing an aviation project, you should be utilising both first and second verification. Most other projects, they would only use the first verification. So with that, you would put in your internal QA process would set it to first verification. And you can then utilise that when a customer has done the review, you could then put in second verification. And then when you're doing a data delivery, you can choose to either do a data delivery of a partial or a complete delivery. But for an IETP, it may be a partial delivery, but you should make sure that it's fully operational and that you don't have broken links anywhere. So that would be the main ways that you would identify your deliverable.
From an S1000D perspective,
Obviously, as you're going through and identifying your deliverables, you'd have some sort of transmittal or transfer notification documentation
as well.
And that could have additional information inside there. You could do that as a descriptive data module and just populate it and as if it was a form, and you could put information into it to give it as part of the IETP.
Because there's not a transmittal letter schema as such.
No, there's not. So yes, so they're the sorts of things that we can then start to look at.
Okay, excellent. So I think, yep, absolutely, yes. So certainly our tool set does. So the question was good to know that there's a link validation. Certainly our tool set does. We have a link validator tool.
We do.
And so that's, and when we say links, that's everything from data module references, PDFs that might be referenced, images, internal references. So it does all a complete reference check and can generate a report at the end of it as well. But yeah, different tool sets vary, and that's not necessarily, I don't know that that's even an official, process in S1000D.
No. There's nothing inside S1000D to say that you need to give a report to verify linkings.
Yeah.
But it's nice to be able to give that to the end customer.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
as evidence.
Otherwise, the poor customer's got to open up the data IETP and click on every link.
And we've heard of people doing that for weeks, weeks on end.
I'm not.
Ugh, horrible. Okay, so well, thank you everyone. We're now over time, so thank you everyone for attending. We have recorded the session. Samantha will be connecting with you so that you can take a look at this. Like we said, part 1 and part 2. You're more than welcome to go back through and review that content again. And we hope to see you at next month's webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.